I'm with Kev Toohey, Principal, Atchison. Kev, thank you very much for participating in the 2025 Alternatives Symposium.
Thanks for having me.
From a theoretical perspective, Kev, what core principles should investors be considering when they're deciding how much of the portfolio they're going to allocate to alternatives?
Yeah, so we've just done a white paper recently that sort of touches on these points, but it's largely, first question is really around liquidity profile of the assets in question. I mean, alternatives is, a broad church. So to the extent that liquidity is an issue, that's going to come into consideration. Often we see sort of 10 to 30% range, and that's a consequence of what are the assets and what's the profile of the investor. To the extent that you're not peer relative, a future fund, a family office that can be very long term in nature, that's where you're getting the 30% sort of range. Those are a bit more peer relative, or liquidity conscious. So 10 is sort of where we see it.
In practice, what are some of the really crucial steps in evaluating alternative investments to ensure that they align with both the portfolio goals and the risk tolerances and some of those liquidity aspects you mentioned? Yeah,
so I mean, what we do is define first what's the closest sort of sister traditional asset. So if it's private equity, that's largely going to be public equities. If it's debt, private debt, there's been a lot of work on. We actually will, if it's underpinned by property, we'll think about it more as a real asset and a property alternative. If it's lending to businesses, that will come from fixed interest. So we compare it against the traditional asset class. Is there some compelling investment opportunity because the manager has access to deal flow, some alpha generating capability set, and try and hone in on that, because the opportunity cost is, or where we're typically allocating from, is from that traditional asset class. So we want to be confident that there is this compelling reason why we should allocate capital away from those more traditional assets.
Kev, how does the approach to alternatives in wealth management differ globally, particularly when comparing practices in the US and Europe with those in other regions?
So we were on the US trip last year and met with a number of US advisors. And when I contrast with the Australian landscape, it's fair to say there's more product available in the US. We're seeing more and more coming to Australia, but of the European and US names, access to onshore product. But secondly, also, as I understand, the advisors have a lot more discretion around aggregating their clients, and so in Australia, it's quite hard if you're on a platform to then transition your clients to a preferred platform, or if you buy businesses that have exposure to other platforms you don't use. That aggregation story is quite difficult, and certainly the case with alternatives. So their ability, I guess, to make allocations and be able to sort of transition clients across platforms is certainly a lot easier.
With the evolving landscape in alternatives, including emerging sectors and increased institutional participation, how do you see the role of alternatives in portfolios changing over, say, the next 10 years?
Yeah, I think certainly. So we've got clients of industry funds, and they've been using their alternatives allocation. It's becoming a little bit more difficult for them now with the new APRA rules, which is interesting because you're seeing the super funds having to go to benchmark and be a lot more judicious with their allocations away from the traditional asset classes, which alternatives largely requires you to take that step away. So arguably wealth advisors might be in a sort of a position where they become or the managers are now going to be willing to create that product for that marketplace. Come and not just come and talk to the large industry funds where that's potentially going to be more difficult. So we're expecting sort of larger allocations, starting from lower bases. There is the platform and liquidity profiles that need to be handled. But certainly we're expecting higher allocations.
We are closing this event with a workshop that explores that institutional approach to alternatives. What guidance do you have for advisors who are seeking to replicate the allocations to alternatives in private wealth that we might see in some of the larger pension funds?
Yeah, I think so. A key difference though is that a large pension fund generally has the benefit that they only have a handful of portfolios that they have to manage. It might be a spectrum of low risk to high risk and then sector sleeves, and that's it. Whereas the typical wealth business is going to have 100, 200, 2,000 clients, and so the tailoring, to the extent that how you structure your business matters and how you deliver your investment solutions. So it might be that you're using managed accounts for the bulk of your clients. And maybe you can fit some alternatives within those. So we're seeing liquid alternatives living within a managed account structure. But then how do you create that framework for those less liquid alternatives that you can't have in your traditional, and still offer that as a differentiator, particularly for maybe your medium to large clients, where you can offer them a solution that's maybe not in the sort of day-to-day managed portfolio, but still providing an attractive solution for the client.
Kev Toohey, Principal at Atchison, thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you, James. Cheers.